Hello everyone. I'm Eric, the workplace safety guy, and today, you are looking at the most lethal work machine in the United States. It is not an explosives factory. It is not an offshore oil platform in the middle of the ocean. It is a fellerbuncher, a forest harvesting machine that weighs 30 tons, cuts a tree in under 8 seconds, and is operating right now in forests from the northern tip to the southern edge of this country. And I need you to understand one thing before anything else. Most of the operators who died inside these machines believed they were in the safest place in the forest. That certainty was exactly what put them at risk. In 2003, the American forestry sector had the highest fatality rate of any occupation in the United States, 131. 6 deaths per every 100,000 workers. To calibrate that number for you, construction workers die at a rate of
6%,000.
Police officers, 13. 8. Firefighters, 7. 0. The American logger was dying at a rate 14 times higher than a police officer. 14 times. And this is not old data buried in an archive somewhere. It is the reality that pushed the American federal government to build one of the most detailed occupational safety standards ever written for a specific sector. Then the industry mechanized. And the death count dropped. But what nobody told you is that the risks did not disappear. They transformed. And transformed risks that are not recognized are risks that keep on killing, now wearing a veneer of safety that gives crews a false sense of protection. Stay here with me because over the next few minutes I am going to show you exactly what OSHA identified, what NIOSH documented with real field data, and why operations that believe they are in compliance are still putting operators at risk of death. And the most shocking detail in this entire system comes in the last 2 minutes of this video. Do not close this video. The central standard governing every forest harvesting operation in the United States is OSHA 29 CFR 1910. 266, Subpart R, Logging Operations. It came into effect in February 1995, and it was built for a very specific reason. The forestry sector was killing workers at a scale no other American productive sector could match. The standard does not apply only to one type of harvesting. It covers all timber extraction operations, regardless of the final use of the product, sawn lumber, pulp, biomass, chips. If there is an employee felling or moving trees, 1910. 266 applies in full, with no exceptions. When you analyze this standard in detail, and I am talking about reading every paragraph, every subparagraph, every cross-referenced engineering specification, what appears is not a list of prohibitions. It is a layered risk management system. And every single layer that fails leaves the next one completely exposed. The first point that 1910. 266 F1 establishes seems simple. Every machine must be inspected before its initial use in each work shift. Defects or damage must be repaired, or the machine must be replaced, before work begins. Seems obvious. But here is the detail that 9 out of 10 field supervisors do not know. This applies to equipment that the worker themselves brought from home as well. If the operator arrived with their own tool, the inspection is still the employer's legal responsibility. It is not a choice. It is not a good HR practice. It is a federal legal obligation. And OSHA will enforce this in any audit without exception. Under 1910. 266 F14, every tractor, skidder, swing yarder, log stacker, log loader, and any mechanical felling device, including tree shears and fellerbunchers, placed into service after February 9, 1995, must be equipped with FOPS and ROPS. FOPS is the Falling Object Protective Structure, protection against objects falling onto the cab from above. ROPS is the Rollover Protective Structure, structural protection against machine rollover. And the standard is absolute on this. If these structures were removed for any reason whatsoever, the employer is responsible for reinstalling them before any operation resumes. ROPS performance standards are defined by SAE-J 1040 from April 1988, which means the American standard is not vague. It references tested, measurable, and directly inspectable engineering specifications. But here is the point that opens the biggest safety gap in this entire system, and it is the element I promised to reveal right here in this first section. The standard requires ROPS. The standard requires FOPS. And the standard, in paragraph 1910. 266 D33 requires that operators of machines equipped with these structures wear the seatbelt. The seatbelt is not an accessory. It is not comfort. The seatbelt is the mechanism that keeps the operator inside the ROPS protection zone during a rollover event. A machine with a correctly installed ROPS where the operator is not belted in is protection that protects absolutely nobody. I have personally documented this exact combination, structure present, seatbelt ignored, as a direct cause of fatality. The accident investigation will find this in the technical report, and the employer will be held legally accountable. Here is where the data that changes everything comes in. Because there is a narrative that has dominated the sector since the early 2000s, mechanization saved lives, so the problem is solved. That narrative is partially correct. And it is totally dangerous. NIOSH documented in studies conducted in West Virginia a result that the sector should be repeating in every single onboarding training session. Before mechanization with feller bunchers, the workers' compensation injury claim rate in the studied companies was 19.4 per 100 workers. After the introduction of the machines, that rate dropped to 5.2 per 100 workers. A reduction of more than 70% in injury claim records. Struck by accidents, being hit by a moving object or piece of equipment, dropped from 10.1 to 1.9 per 100 workers. The pre-mechanization rate was 3.8 times greater than the post-mechanization rate. These numbers are real. Mechanization saved lives and limbs, without any discussion whatsoever. But NIOSH also documented what came after. And this is exactly where the industry made the mistake of stopping paying attention. With the operator protected inside the cab, the highest concentration point for injury changed location entirely. Today, the most frequent accidents in modern mechanized operations happen at three specific and entirely predictable moments. First, during machine entry and exit slips, trips, and falls on the steps and access platforms leading up to the cab. Second, during maintenance activities around the equipment, when the operator is in the machine's perimeter zone and not inside the cab. Third, during support operations near moving machines, when field workers cross the operational perimeter without the operator having complete visibility of what is happening around them. The machine got safer on the inside. The machine's perimeter became the new critical point of death. And this is exactly why 1910 266 F5 exists. It requires every machine to be equipped with adequate means of access, steps, handrails, non-slip surfaces, that allow safe entry and exit at all times. This is not an ergonomic comfort detail. It is a federal requirement that responds directly to a real fatality statistic documented by NIOSH. Now comes the part that most operators and field supervisors ignore. Not out of bad faith, but because nobody ever explained the complete logic of the standard in a way that could be applied dynamically in the field during active operations. 1910 266 D6 establishes that employees must be spaced and their functions organized so that the action of one worker does not create a hazard for any other worker. Simple to read. Extremely difficult to apply correctly without understanding what the standard requires in terms of concrete operational geometry on the ground. Work areas must be designated so that no tree can fall into an adjacent occupied work area. And the minimum distance between adjacent occupied work areas is 2 tree lengths of the trees being felled at that specific point in the stand. 2 tree lengths. In a eucalyptus harvesting operation with trees at harvest stage standing 25 meters tall, that means 50 meters of mandatory minimum distance between crews. In pine at 30 meters of height, it is 60 meters of legally required separation. And this number is not fixed for the entire shift. The standard explicitly specifies that this distance must reflect the degree of terrain slope, vegetation density, tree height, soil structure, and other foreseeable hazards at the specific location. On slopes where rolling or sliding of logs is reasonably foreseeable, and in commercial forest land with inclined terrain, this is almost always foreseeable, the distance required by the standard is even greater than 2 tree lengths. What this means in daily operations is direct and completely non-negotiable. The distance between crews cannot be evaluated once at the start of the shift and then forgotten for the rest of the day. As the feller buncher advances through the stand and the surrounding trees change in species, height, and condition, this evaluation must be redone in real time. It is a dynamic control, not a static configuration set at the beginning of the shift. And the standard complements this with an operational requirement that goes directly against what most operators were informally trained to do. No log shall be moved until every employee is in a confirmed safe position. Not approximately safe. Not reasonably out of the way. in a verified and confirmed position of safety before each and every load movement. NIOSH identified one of the most underestimated causes of fatality in forest harvesting, mechanized or not, as being danger trees and widowmakers. And the error that production pressure creates around these risks is systematic, predictable, and documented in investigation after investigation after investigation. The technical definition in 1910. 266 for a danger tree is precise. A standing tree that poses a hazard to employees due to conditions such as deterioration or physical damage to the root system, trunk, stem, or limbs, and taking into account the lean and direction of the tree. Widowmaker is the term that the sector itself uses to describe dry, heavy limbs lodged high in the canopy, ready to fall without any warning when a vibration, a gust of wind, or the disturbance caused by an adjacent falling tree dislodges them. A dry limb from a mature eucalyptus can weigh between 60 and 120 kilograms. In free fall from 20 meters of height, the impact is fatal even with conventional PP in perfect condition and worn correctly. And the operational rule the standard imposes, and which is systematically violated under production pressure, is this: dead, rotten, or broken trees that present a hazard, including widowmakers, must be felled or removed before harvesting operations begin in their vicinity. Before. Not during the productive shift. Not when the operator identifies them mid-cycle. Before any crew enters the area at all. This assessment is not a task for the harvesting operator within the productive cycle. It is an area access prerequisite. The crew cannot enter to produce while this inventory is not completed and the hazard trees are not eliminated or isolated. The argument the sector uses to compress or skip this step is always the same one I mentioned at the start of this video: the machine protects the operator. And it does, within its design limits. But those limits end precisely at the moment the operator opens the cab door and puts their foot on the first access step. The ROPS is installed. The FOPS is installed. The operator is outside the cab. And no structure covers their body in the 3 meters between the cab platform and the ground below. There are 3 requirements of 1910. 266 that receive far less attention than they deserve in any onboarding training I have ever analyzed. All 3 have a direct documented history of contributing to serious accidents when they are ignored in field operations. Before abandoning any machine, even for 2 minutes, even to check the terrain ahead, even to drink water, the operator is required by federal law to follow a 4-step sequence without exception every single time. First, engage the parking brake or brake lock. Second, place the transmission in the park position. Third, position every moving element in the ground position. Fourth, discharge the hydraulic pressure systems. 4 steps. Every exit. Without exception and without shortcut. This is not an end-of-shift maintenance protocol. It applies to every exit from the cab during the active operation. When I analyze field maintenance accident investigations, this sequence was rarely followed on the exit immediately prior to the incident. On the communication system, paragraph D7 of 1910. 266 establishes that manual signals or audible contact, whistles, horns, radios, must be used whenever noise, distance, or restricted visibility prevents clear communication by voice. And the technical detail that directly contradicts what most operators were informally trained to believe: engine noise is not an acceptable signal under this standard. The operator of a feller buncher that is running and operating cannot assume that the machine's noise is communicating its presence sufficiently to the workers in the surrounding perimeter. The signaling system must exist independently of operational noise at all times. And only one designated person may emit signals during the operation, except in a declared emergency situation. Communication through multiple simultaneous emitters in a forest field creates operational ambiguity that, under time pressure and noise, kills. Paragraph D5 requires that all work be stopped and every employee move to a safe location when environmental conditions create a hazard. The standards list includes lightning storms, strong winds that could affect tree fall direction, heavy rain or snow, extreme cold, dense fog, fires, landslides, and darkness. The standard uses the phrase such as "but not limited to." The list is not closed or exhaustive. The employer has the responsibility to evaluate any condition that creates a hazard, regardless of whether it appears on that list. This means the decision to stop work cannot be delegated to the operator sitting in the cab looking up at the treetops through glass. A formal, documented stop work protocol implanted by the employer before the season begins must exist as written policy. Now I close the loop I opened at the very beginning of this video. What collapses first when an accident happens in a mechanized harvesting operation is not the equipment. It is not the hazard tree that nobody removed. What collapses first is the training system, because it is the layer upon which every single other layer depends on having functioned consistently and in documented form. Paragraph I of 1910. 266 requires the employer to ensure that every employee, including supervisors, receives first aid and CPR training. And the reason lies in the brutal geographic reality of the sector. Forest harvesting operations are frequently located at points where emergency medical services can take 40, 60, or even 80 minutes to arrive on scene. The standard recognizes this reality by requiring that the first aid kit, mandatory at every work site where trees are being cut, at every active landing, and in every employee transport vehicle, have contents that reflect the degree of isolation of that specific location. And the detail that the vast majority of operations completely ignore, that kit content must be reviewed and approved annually by a licensed health professional. Annual review. A medical doctor or nurse. This is in Appendix A of the standard as a federal requirement. Not as a best practice suggestion. A federal requirement. The standard also requires that new employees work under the close supervision of experienced workers until verified competence is demonstrated, and the record of that competence must be documented with the employee's name, the trainer's name, the date, all topics covered, and the result of the competency evaluation. These records must be maintained throughout the entire period of employment, not just through onboarding. And the training cycle does not stop with onboarding. Safety and health meetings at least once per month for every employee, with formal records kept. Not once per team. For each individual person on the payroll. And what does this entire structure reveal when you analyze it as a complete system? That 1910. 266 is not simply a set of equipment rules. It is a risk management system that begins before the pre-shift inspection, runs through the geometric configuration of the work area, through hazard tree control, through real-time environmental monitoring, through structured communication between crews, and ends in the continuous documented training of every single person in the operation. When one of these layers fails, the others become exposed. And when more than one layer fails at the same time, which production pressure almost always provokes, that is when the accident that everyone said they did not see coming happens exactly as it had been building, shift after shift, day after day, without anyone noticing. Let me give you one number to close this video. In 2010, the American forestry sector employed 95,000 workers and recorded 70 deaths in a single year. A rate of 73. 7 deaths per 100,000 workers. That same year, the average occupational fatality rate across the United States as a whole was 3.5%. The American forestry worker was dying at a rate 21 times higher than the average American worker. 21 times. With the standard in effect. With the machines operating in the field. With the ROPS installed and certified. Because structure without protocol is not protection. Equipment without documented training is not safety. And partial compliance with 1910. 266 is not compliance. It is a written record that you knew about the risks and chose to ignore part of them. If you work in forest operations and this video touched something you recognize from your own time in the field, drop a comment right now below this video. I want to know which of these layers fails most often in your operation. That exchange of real field information saves real lives. If you are a supervisor, a safety manager, or the person responsible for a forest operation, and you want to understand exactly where your 1910, 266 compliance system is at real risk right now, this channel was built for exactly that purpose. Every video on this channel is constructed from real standards, data documented by NIOSH and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and direct analysis of real accident investigations. Click subscribe right now. Hit the notification bell. Because the next video goes straight into what happens when an OSHA audit shows up unannounced at an operation that was completely convinced it was in compliance, and what the federal inspectors find in the first 2 hours of that inspection. You will not want to miss that one.